Mark McKeever says, "Sup, fellow nerds? Not much, hitting the nightly coffee because I don't sleep. That's just not something I do. Uh, what about you, Boom? You wanna, any tales to regale us with?"
Well, I finally got a workable computer here. I sort of got the Apple tax, but I got a new iMac here, so it seems to be functioning well. So hopefully, there are still wrinkles on the Wi-Fi that I'm working out, but I don't want to jinx it, but I should be fine for tonight. I think this, we should be good to go. And I'm still, I'll be setting up for. I'm trying different programs. I'm learning new programs for my own live streaming, solo live streaming, as well as streaming with yourself in the future, and some ideas I'm working on. And just so busy at work and everything else. And I haven't done a video. I think now it's going on 4 weeks. So it's, I'm. If it wasn't for you and this weekly starting to do this again, I'd get very rusty. But
Yeah, I know. I hear you, man. Like I have been. I want to make it a point to make sure this gets back to a weekly thing, which we've been good about the last 2 weeks. But I would also like to at least put out like 1 to 2 edited videos a month because they take a lot of time.
yeah,
Just on all the editing and the exporting and all of those shenanigans. Aside from the fact that like these are discussion based, right? So we can sort of bounce off of each other, bounce off of the live audience. When it comes to doing, those live stream or the edited videos, I have to read the book like 2 or 3 times and then, summarize it in a way that I think won't deprive people from reading the book themselves, and then, get really pretentious about it and give my little critique. So, it's a struggle. It's a lot of work. Nerdy Blurb TV says, "Oh snap, we're here for this session. 100%, man. It is good to see you." Samoki dude, my boys, how are you? I'm doing okay, man. Been doing a lot of reading. Little recommendation for everybody out there. If you want a somewhat mature sort of fantasy book to read, it's one I just finished for class. Okay, thanks, Green Screen. It's The Iron Dragon's Daughter. It's a novel from the 90s, really subverts a lot of the tropes of the genre. It's really quite brilliant. And Michael Swanwick is a super underrated author, so I'd highly recommend it. It's like a good 400 pages. It's some time to spend, but I would definitely recommend it for sure. John Thomas, what's good, peeps? Living my best life.
The Devil's Red Bride is good. I've been enjoying that. It's by Vault Comics, something different. I've been picking up some indie stuff too. And it's written by, it's called The Devil's Red Bride by Gerner, Bivens, Monahan, and Powell. It's something different. I've been, well, we'll get into it, but I've been a little bit down with DC. They've just been, part of the good things about me not doing a video in the last 4 weeks is, honestly, I mean, I've joked about this before, but I'm serious when I say, like, I just haven't been feeling good. Like, I've been in a kind of like a bad mood, and it's not just the state of comics. It's just other stuff at work and stuff like that too. I mean, there's life and everything, and stresses and anxieties, and just being sort of overworked, overburdened a little bit. And sometimes it's that old saying, if I have nothing nice to say and I can't try to be a little bit comedic in a rant, then I'm better off not doing a video because, I mean, at least with you, I mean, we can hold each other accountable. Usually if one of us is really off, the other one can, bring us back on track. So, so it's like, I haven't really been on my game at all in the last 4 weeks. And so that's why I'm kind of glad we're doing this and try to talk some positivity with DC's future state and see if the future holds anything worthwhile.
For sure, and more of that to come too. We're going to be getting into more than just DC's future state, but also Marvel as well. So with that, I think it's time to intro up the show. Hey guys, welcome to the 60th episode of Let's Talk Comics, where myself and another co-host in the comics community discuss one of the many facets of the storytelling medium that is comics. Whether it be stories, creators, constructs, or adaptations, we hit it all this week, of course. I am joined by my partner in crime, the one and only Canadian comic book cultist, Comic Boom. What's going on, man?
Well, I'll answer that question for the third time. Yeah, I'm just glad to be here, talking comics.
Yeah, always, man, for sure. Big thank you to everybody that's already joining us live in the chat. You guys are the best. You guys help to keep this stuff going. So if you would leave a like down below if you're feeling ready for this conversation, definitely chime in with your thoughts in the live chat as we go through said conversation. And of course, if you're not already, please make sure to subscribe to my channel down below using the big bad red sexy subscribe button. And of course, click the link in the description to check out this guy over here. I pointed in the right direction the first time round. So
You're not drunk yet.
that means you guys have to go subscribe to this man, okay? So with that being said, we figured we'd capitalize on a little bit more of the sort of aftershock of DC Future State's solicitations and whatnot, and just generally kind of have a conversation about, well, the next generation of comic book superheroes. And the big question to ask is, are we ready for a new generation of superheroes, right? DC especially, I think, is well known for having such a vast library of supporting characters that are chomping at the chain, I think, to take the spotlight from the characters that we all know and love. Bruce Wayne is Batman, Clark Kent is Superman, Diana Prince is Wonder Woman. All three of them have had numerous characters that have been primed to be their successors. And I'm thinking maybe it's about time to have that conversation after 80 plus years of DC Comics, 70 or so years of Marvel. Are we ready to move on? And I'm going to send that question out into the ether, obviously, to the live chat. But Rocky, I'm curious. You've been a comic book fan now for 40 plus years. Are you ready to move on from the characters that you grew up reading and move on into successors?
I am, and it took a long time coming. But if I was to, what really got me depressed in the last few weeks is for the first time in a long time, there was a sustained period where it used to be if I was depressed reading comics and I didn't like the direction of DC or Marvel, I would get a little bit down, but there just that in the nick of time, a good story would come out, or something would come out, and it would sort of reignite me and get me excited again. And I got to admit, looking back this last 2 years, certainly there's been some good comics, but there's been a disturbing amount of really not very good comics. And just overall, it's been disappointing. But you know what? I go back to something Mark Waid said. He said in interviews, and he said to me when I met him in 2006 in Calgary at Calgary Comic Con. He said to me, every generation deserves to have comic books speak to them. I'm paraphrasing, and it's true. And I'm an old guy, but you know what? We need new characters. I rant about Wonder Woman all the time, and the truth of the matter is, I just got to accept the fact that Wonder Woman's never going to be written the way I'd like her to be written. And I've ranted about that. We've talked about that. I won't go into the details. Suffice to say, why not give us a new Wonder Woman? If it can't be Wonder Woman, maybe a new Wonder Woman. Brazilian one. Her name is Yara Flor. Kind of a odd name, Yara Flor. But getting some fresh blood in there. Because after comic books are going to be written for more of a younger generation than myself. I get that. And I don't mind being taken out of my shell a little bit and, stretching the boundaries. And, maybe a new generation can lead to new types of storytelling. Because let's face it, you in particular, your criticisms of Batman, and you're very into the, analytical aspect of it and the story structure and everything else. But the reality is that when it comes to Batman, a lot of stories about Batman have, in a sense, already been told. And why not get a different blood there? Get an African American in there. Let's rock the boat a little bit and maybe shake the lethargy of this pandemic and this depression that has set down on all of us over the last 6 months.
Yeah, in many ways, I agree with you, and I haven't been shy about making such statements prior. I'm ready for a new generation of DC heroes, and I think that obviously there is a sort of caveat, right? Like, we have to introduce these new characters into the role in an organic way. And it has to be sort of approached from twofold. How can we, for all intents and purposes, shelf these iconic first generation heroes that we've grown to love? And how do we transition new characters? And then moving that further, right? what characters deserve these mantles? Are they completely new characters that we make for the roles? Are they one of the numerous legacy characters that follow a lot of these mantles? And for me, you know, I think it's been time that you give the second generation of DC successors times to take over their predecessors' mantles. You know, we've seen a world obviously where Dick Grayson's Batman. We've seen a world where Wally West is the headlining Flash. Have we seen a world where the context totally flips and their entire generation becomes the headliners? We haven't. And I think it's about time. A lot of these characters have been written and have grown and deserve a shot at that mantle. And it's not going to be easy, right? One of my favorite things about the Dick Grayson era of Batman was watching him fail, was watching him realize that he can't be the same Batman as Bruce, watching him understand that he has to obviously take his mentor's lessons and reinterpret them for what he's able to do himself. And that is really profound. And I think you could take a sort of similar journey with a lot of these characters. And maybe
let me ask you a question, because Nightwing, or Dick Grayson, is one of the new characters in Future State. He's going to be portraying a character called Red X, which comes from the Young Justice cartoon. He infiltrates the bad guys.
Have they confirmed that that's going to be Dick in the Red X costume?
Well, that's what I read that. I just read that off the CBR.com, off the Future State, who's next in DC's Heroes, and what they said about Red X. I can just read it quick here. It's not long. It says, one of the most intriguing heroes in the Future State promo image was Red X, an alter ego for Dick Grayson, introduced on the Teen Titans animated series as a means for the young hero to infiltrate the superhuman or supervillain community. Future State's Red X will similarly be linked to the Teen Titans as a former student sought after by the new generation of Titans in training. That's all it said.
Huh. So I wonder if it's actually going to be Dick in the Red X costume, because the one thing I think is kind of curious is that we haven't seen anything about Damian. And last we saw him, things were not going so well in terms of his positive, or his trajectory towards positivity and goodness. So maybe he embraces a little bit of his darker side. Maybe he picks up the Red X mantle. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. I mean, to be honest, what I'm seeing from Future State isn't my ideal next generation for DC Comics. For me, we get a Justice League where it's Dick, Wally, probably Kara, taking over the sort of head of the super family, maybe even Mary Marvel, sort of filling in that powerhouse. Obviously Garth, basically the Titans, kind of moving up. And, maybe this is when it becomes appropriate to make Cyborg a leaguer, if you ask me. But it's not my company, not my characters. But I think it would be really interesting to give those characters time to take over their predecessors' mantles. And again, the sort of hierarchy of the DC universe would totally change. I mean, really, it wouldn't be Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Trinity anymore, honestly, right? Because obviously you'd have Batman, Dick Grayson's experience. To me, Wally would be part of that Trinity. He's one of the most experienced of that generation, and I think maybe you could make an argument for who the third member of DC's new Trinity would be. But I think it would really, really switch the game up. And, I think it's about time that we see what that looks like. And again, it has to be done in a respectful way, right? Or it has to have been driven by story purposes. So, who's to say? I also think it's worth sort of discussing what that could mean for Marvel, right? Because although they do have legacy characters, they don't have nearly as much of a wealth of legacy characters as DC. So, and I know you're a little bit more of a DC guy, so maybe you're even more willing to swap out Marvel characters.
I don't know if I agree with what you just said. Like,
sure.
Are you? Marvel has a whole pile of diverse and new. Marvel has more new heroes than DC.
I'm saying in terms of legacy characters to known mantles that we already have, Marvel's library of legacy characters sort of pales in comparison to DC's. I mean, the Bat family alone, uh, it probably matches approximately the number of legacy characters that you could use to replace any number of their A-list
I guess
superheroes.
All right, if you're restricting it to just, well, in terms of sheer, if we, your point is taken with respect to legacy, but even with Iron Man, Thor, all the major Avengers all seem to have their next legacies from Hawkeye on. Like Marvel is, I think, doing reasonably well with legacy and has gotten a lot more promotion out of it and has got a lot more mileage out of it. I would even argue than maybe DC has.
In what way?
Quite frankly.
Say in what way? I'm curious.
Well,
I need you to qualify that.
Batman is, I give you Batman. Batman has, but see, the thing is with Batman, when I think of Batman, all his legacy characters have existed. They've always played fast and loose with the timelines with Batman, so it never really feels that it's really a legacy, but it is. I'll grant you Batman, but I don't want to belabor the point. I know the point you're trying to make. I guess at the end of the day, I think Marvel is doing fine. In fact, Marvel, if anything, I think Marvel is pumping out too many new characters, unconnected to legacy. They're creating new characters in and of themselves. So that's so I appreciate what you're saying. You're restricting it to legacy. But Marvel's also, in addition to legacy, they're creating genuinely new heroes. They got a lot more mutants. They got a lot more new Agents of Atlas. I mean, there's a whole slew of new ones there.
Sure,
I don't even know all. I honestly, because I'm not really that big into Marvel, but I spec a little bit on first appearances and what have you, and they clearly have a lot of new characters, not necessarily legacy, but they're quickly developing that.
Yeah, but again, I get, and it's not a burn to Marvel in any sense of the word. It's just, you look at DC's, let's just say like their core 7. Almost all of them have multiple successors to take on the mantles, right? I mean, Batman, I'm not going to sit here and name you all of Batman's potential successors because that would take the whole damn show. But, Superman, you have Connor, you have John, you have Kara, you have who was that? Oh God, it was like mid 2000s maybe when he like adopted a young Daxamite. For the most part, I'm trying to remember who that was. Yeah, didn't he like pretty much adopt a young Daxamite or something like that?
Oh, he might. I can't remember. Yeah, I'm thinking of Monol. Monol was kind of involved a lot.
I don't think it was Monol. I could be wrong. Somebody fact check me, please. But Diana has Cassie. She has Donna. Green Lantern. Jesus, don't get me started. The Flash. Wally 1, Wally 2, Bart. Goddamn, we're probably going to see a Wally 3 at this rate. You know what I'm saying? And I could go on and on.
What's interesting though, what they're doing different though now is they're actually creating it's in a separate timeline. Whereas we're accustomed to DC legacy characters living alongside each other in the same timeline where no one really seems to age. Batman looks the same, Superman looks the same, but he's just got an older kid, and they age up John Kent, and they try to have all the legacy characters almost adults living in the same time period, and it just feels off. So what DC is doing now is that they're actually moving the time period ahead 10 years or 15, and that's kind of what I like about it. Yeah. And I feel, just as a quick point, let's quickly talk about one of the biggest disappointments of what DC's done in the last 3 years, and that is aging up of John Kent and the loss of the Super Sons. What I got my eye on, and what I'm a little disappointed with Future State is that we don't see a much younger generation of heroes. What we have is we got young Andy, who's Arthur Curry's and Mira's daughter, Princess Andy, and she's going to be with Jackson Hyde, who's the new Aquaman. So I really like that. And maybe it's because I'm an older father, but I really like that younger John Kent dynamic. that young, I like the older hero with raising kid dynamic, probably because I like to think I can relate to it, right?
Mhm.
And it's just something that means something to me, and I would like to see more of that. And I think there's potential there with young Princess Andy. They can give her, and we can have a brand new young Justice in Future State, which hasn't unfortunately been part of what I can see up on the plate. But I hope that's what is coming should Future State be successful.
Sure, yeah. I mean, like I said, I'm pretty much willing to give a grand majority of these concepts a shot for sure. You know, obviously, based on our last conversation, if by the way, if you're watching this and you haven't seen it, when we're done with this, make sure you guys go watch our last stream where we went a little bit more into depth about what we're thinking about Future State and what had been released about it at the time. You know, I don't think this is going to leave a lasting impression, as all the signs sort of point towards this being a little footnote. You know, a little page break for DC to go and take some time to figure out what the hell they want to do. But you know, but I do genuinely believe that they might have gone about it the wrong way. You know, if we're skipping forward linearly in time, to me, you know, there are handfuls of characters for the most part that I think are more deserving of these iconic mantles than the ones that we're really getting. And again, I'm not saying I'm not going to give it a try, because you can make anything work as long as there's a story behind it. A good one. Let me qualify that. A good story behind it. But you know, I think that if we're fast forwarding 10 years from now, to me, you've got to take a look at the second or third generation characters, you know, taking over the mantles. I think you got to have a Dick Grayson in the role of Batman, and if it's not Dick Grayson, it's probably got to be Tim Drake. You know, and you know, even with Superman, John Kent sort of being the direct descendant of Clark, yeah, I do see him being Superman sometime in the near future. But is he coming right after Clark? Maybe not. You know, I don't know. I really do like the idea, you know, that you brought up there with Aquaman and what they're doing with Andy and Calder. I think that's a great idea. Mostly because I also just, in my head, I don't think that Tempest takes up the mantle of Aquaman. I don't think he feels himself deserving of it. I think that's sort of a psychological sort of restriction that he's placed on himself, in the same way Wally did originally when he pulled up the Flash mantle after Barry. But you know, I don't want to spend the whole time just specifically talking about what Future State's doing. I kind of want to discuss, you know, what in your mind and everybody watching is the right way to handle moving on into the next generation. And I guess by doing that, is the first thing you have to consider is, how do we open up those roles? So to you, does the first generation just retire? You know, does something happen where it's so catastrophic that the generation dies? Like what? And I'm sure it's probably going to be more nuanced than that, right? I imagine all of these different characters are going to have a couple of different reasons for retiring. But are there any sort of specific instances in your head that you can think of as to how we shepherd out the old generation?
Well, I know how I would write it, and what do I know? I'm not a writer, but you asked, so I'm going to answer. And that is that I think that if they write an older generation of Trinity, like an older Superman, older Wonder Woman, which is what they're doing, an older Batman, I really do think that. I mean, I'm lucky enough in my life to overshare. I think my first divorce was in 19 was well, I was 38 years old. I'm 51 now, and my life really began again after my divorce, and second marriage, got to have a child, the whole nine yards. And I had a mentor, and I got to tell you, having a mentor is quite the thing. And what I find interesting about it is that mentors aren't perfect; they make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like my mentor always said to me. I remember one time I said to him, I said, "Well, what do you get out of all this?" Because he was always calling me and checking up on me, and just, you know, just coming up to BS. And he just smiled, and he looked at me and he says, "I get to watch." And by that he means, you know, just like, and I imagine the Trinity. If you're like Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, you get to watch all these amazing kids that you helped raise, that you played a role in them. I mean, there's that old expression that the teacher learns more than the pupil. And I like to think that the Trinity is learning more than the next generation is, just by watching them fail and then succeed and picking themselves up by the bootstraps. And mentors make mistakes too. People are always learning, and I think that the key, what I hope to see in elements of in the writing and how they move forward with it, is, have Wonder Woman and Batman and Superman indeed be the mentors. Don't make them like Luke Skywalker. Do you know what I mean? Like, don't make him a bum, sucking off some alien tits on it. You know what I mean? Like, going too far wacko. Like, remember that they still have their wisdom in them, but they're imperfect, but that they still inspire, and that a younger generation can be mentored by them. And you can have the younger generation screw up royally. That's where the drama comes in, right? And I just think that you can still have that dynamic, and despite the older generation.
So I think there's a couple things to kind of get into, because I don't necessarily think, every first generation character is going to have the luxury, of being the backseat driver. At least once, we move forward in time and, their proteges are to take over the mantles. Aside from the fact that, 9 times out of 10, a lot of these first generation heroes, the Bruce Waynes, Clark Kent's, Diana Princes, they've already spent time mentoring the next generation, right? So, I mean, at what point do you just kind of, push your baby out of the nest and let them fly? So I think it's going to be different from character to character. To me, I don't know if a fully functioning Bruce Wayne has the capacity to let somebody else take the role. I think he's a little bit too much of a, I don't want to say a narcissist, but I don't think he trusts really anybody while he's alive to do the job at the level that he can. So to me, for example, if Dick were to take over for Bruce, I think you got to take Bruce off the board somehow. And whether that's killing him, debilitating him, or giving him another role entirely, I don't know if Bruce Wayne will necessarily have the luxury to be in Dick's ear, and I think that's kind of one of the more compelling ways that it worked for Dick as Batman while Grant Morrison was writing the series, was that it was difficult for Dick because, all he has are his memories of Bruce. He doesn't have Bruce in his ear. And he had Alfred, of course. Alfred is a wonderful sort of conduit for that. But, I think it's part of what makes it interesting, because if you had, come on, if you had Bruce Wayne in your ear all the time, how do you lose?
Well, let me ask you, just building on your comment then, are you saying that in your view, given you're very passionate about the Dark Knight, it's even in your name, for God's sake, does your own future state of Batman, is Batman ever at peace? Ever at peace? Does he ever attain that in your story of future state Batman? Is he someone who is forever going to be fighting crime? Can you ever see him being at peace, or is he doomed ultimately to be the older Bruce Wayne on Batman Beyond forever until his last gasping breath fighting crime?
It's hard because
the counterpoint is Tom King, right? The counterpoint is Tom King's Batman Annual #2, where he lives peacefully, marries Catwoman, and dies of Alzheimer's.
Sure. I mean, I love Bruce Wayne, and I would love to see Bruce Wayne get old and die happy. But with how intimately I feel like I know Bruce, just by reading him for all this time, I don't think Bruce can lay idly by. I think in some capacity or another, he will always be involved with Batman until his dying breath. And whether it's putting on the suit, whether it's him, going the Scott Snyder route and cloning himself for a new generation, for every generation, whether it's, him being the guy in the chair. I think that in some capacities you can have Bruce be involved with still being a hero of Gotham and still be happy. I think that is something that is a potential in Bruce's future, but I don't see a world where Bruce isn't involved in some capacity. And to me, you would really have to almost take it out of Bruce's hands in order for him to not be Batman, right? I mean, that's how we've seen it almost every time, except for really Batman and Inc. But at that point, he's like, it's okay, Dickie, you can take Gotham, I'll take everything else, So it's so hard to say because it would have to sort of coincide with how we're developing Bruce at the time. For me, I do think one sort of counterpoint to the sort of Batman Beyond Bruce Wayne is that I think he's embraced his family more. I don't think that he totally isolates himself from the family now, or at least not where we have him. I think that he does die with family, and he dies loved. Now, whether or not he dies at the hand of a villain, whether or not he dies due to his sort of overwhelming commitment to not let anybody die on his hands, or whether he dies of old age, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's so hard because it'll whatever happens to Bruce will have to be necessitated by where you want to go next, right? Do you want this to be a story about the next generation sort of struggling to do the thing that Bruce couldn't technically, right? Because Bruce would have died. Do you want it to be somebody, well guided and well mentored? Do you want it to be somebody who, is going to be sort of constantly in the shadow of the Batman, right? Pun intended. So I don't know. I don't necessarily know if I have an answer. Like I said, I think for me, the only thing that I have locked in my head is who comes next. And for me, I don't know if it's anybody other than Dick, unless Dick Grayson's dead. To me, whether or not it's for a short amount of time, or for a long spanning career, Dick Grayson is the next Batman in my book. And I'm saying that as somebody who has grown to love Damian Wayne as my favorite Robin. To me, honestly, I think considering the intimacy, I think Nightwing becomes a legacy. I think Damian Wayne becomes Nightwing. How could he not? Right? Like I don't know. That's just for me. And I don't want to focus too much time centrally on Batman because I could do that. We could have a whole conversation about the legacy of the Batman. But I don't know. Let's jump into some of these live questions here and see what other people are thinking. Nerdy Blurb TV wants to know, would you guys do a full sweep of predecessors to take over at once, like with an event, or slowly one by one? I don't think I care. I don't think I care either way. I think either could be done well, as long as it's organic, as long as it has a purpose to the characters and to the story, and whatever happens, it becomes the sort of driving force behind what happens next. I don't think it really matters. I don't quite have a preference because I think either one of them could be done well, and either one of them could serve to shepherd in a new generation as long as it's done well. I know it's not really the answer you were looking for, but
well, I think that's the best answer, and I agree with you. It has to feel organic, and I think we have to incorporate a little bit of marketing on that too, because you want the story to feel organic. You want the story, you want it to feel natural that the next generation comes into play. You don't want to just start off with a brand new bunch of new characters and wonder what happened to the older generation. And the other thing is to build on your comments about Batman. Batman arguably Batman fights superheroes because of an obsession. Clark Kent fights bad guys because he chooses to, and he does it as an act of kindness. He does it every day because that's what makes him happy. He likes helping people, and he's never going to stop helping people. It's not about an obsession with Superman. So I can see Superman doing it forever. Plus, he's immortal. Wonder Woman is at peace with herself, and at least how I view it. Plus, she's immortal. So I see Wonder Woman and Superman definitely going off into the future and continuing to do what they're doing, quite frankly, and mentoring and being there in different capacities. Batman is more problematic, and because your interpretation of Batman as being driven by obsession is, I mean, unless something happens to make him overcome that obsession, he's doomed, or something's got to intervene. He's either family's going to save Batman, or yeah, he's gonna it's gonna have a depressing ending.
Yeah, it's so hard, man, because I think you could do so many different things, and ultimately, for me, you could win me over multiple ways. If somebody had the right story and Cassandra Cain was the next Batman, I'd be like, let's do it. As long as the story is well done. Obviously I have my sort of preferences in my head, but as long as whatever happens is well developed, I think you can make it work. And I won't sort of restrict any sort of potential stories based off of what I feel like should happen, as like I said, as long as it's done well. And some lucky dude says that he thinks Jason Todd would be a good Red X regarding Future State. Sure, but like, does he need to move on from Red Hood? To me, characters take on new mantles when they have to, or when they've outgrown or sort of, I would say, outdeveloped the role they've been before, whether that's for good or for bad. And I don't think Jason Todd is. I just don't think it a necessity for Jason Todd to be anything other than Red Hood right now. I don't think he's grown past being Red Hood. I don't think he's certainly devolved from being Red Hood. I don't know. I mean, Boom, I don't know how familiar you are with that old Teen Titans cartoon, but if or if not, do you think Jason Todd would be the optimal Red Hood or Red X? Sorry.
Well, that I don't know. Well, I'm familiar a little bit with Red X. I think Jason Todd, ironically enough, is probably more ideally suited to infiltrate supervillains than Nightwing is. But then Nightwing was also Grayson. He's an ex-spy as well. So Dick Grayson even has experience as a spy. So, and frankly, I've always thought of Dick Grayson as being more intelligent than Jason Todd. I view Jason Todd as more of a bull in a china shop, whereas Dick Grayson, he's a little bit more graceful, and he'd probably be a little bit more calm and collective under pressure, undercover. And so, yeah, that's my answer to that. I just wanted to give one quick ad that there's a tendency because DC loves drama to always whenever they deal with the future, there's a tendency for DC and Marvel to always make the future a little bit dystopian sometimes, and always make our beloved characters bad or flawed, like majorly flawed, and go over the top with something that's radically different. What I kind of like what they're doing with Future State is that they're not going completely over the top. And when the most radical version of Justice League is in their new Suicide Squad Future State, but it takes place, it's on Earth 3, where the Justice League of Earth 3 is actually the Suicide Squad. Or they're taken, if I'm reading it correctly, it's the classic form of Justice League appears. They're the new Suicide Squad. They're going to deal with Earth 3 when moralities, of course, are switched. And so I kind of like that. So I like the fact that because if they go too much over the top, then I think they're going to lose some people, where I think there's enough change there that I think if the stories are good enough and they hit, then these stories will be like the old Elseworlds. They'll make them mainstream if these stories resonate with readers.
You make a good point. And I'll have to send one out to our guy, Peter Parker. He says, "Oh, I don't think I'm supposed to be here." Sorry, Pete. We have other things in store for the Marvel Universe. I did also just real quick want to address a contribution to the channel done through the StreamYards chat. You can do so via the link below, like this wonderful human here. And Aaron VO just sends his congratulations on 60 episodes. Thank you for being a part of it, man. I appreciate it. And thank you to everybody that made this sort of possible and gives us a reason, 60 plus times to sit here and shoot the shit. So thank you guys. And if you want to contribute like that and make sure that your comment or question gets read, feel free to do so using the Stream Elements tip link. All of those pennies go back towards the channel. So let's see. Fresh News 247 says, "I think it's a black hole. I don't understand why they're putting this hold on the books for 2 months. Plus, we have that killer winter holder. I think you mean endless winter." And I think he was referring to Future State. Yeah, I mean, do I? I do understand why they're putting everything on hold, because they're trying to save themselves time and give them times to develop it. Now, if Fresh News, I would invite you to go peek back at our last conversation when we talked specifically about Future State, because, one of our sort of leading suspicions is that Future State is also a placeholder. Now, if Future State does sort of lean towards having any sort of real bearing on the future of the DC universe, I invite it. I think it's time for a change. But again, yeah, I mean, I can see why you wouldn't be so happy about it with it just being a placeholder. And I think it does sort of disillusion a number of us. I know in our last conversation, Boom had mentioned that he thinks that, whatever future state books are successful may spawn out into other miniseries, Elseworlds, Black Label, whatever the hell they're going to call it. But it's going to be interesting to see. And speaking of that Endless Winter, I don't think I care at all. I think DC has clearly found success with Tom Taylor doing Deceased and Injustice, and they're like, okay, let's throw somebody else on an Elseworlds book that spans the DC universe and see if it sticks. I don't know, but Boom, do you want to comment briefly on that?
Well, yeah, you know what? When something isn't broken, why try to fix it? And I'm sounding like a broken record along with so many of us. Until Tom King writes something that I find is bad, I'm going to continue to support him. And look, he's not like absolutely excellent, but he's really, really good. And I think he's the best of that DC has. I think he's been more consistent in terms of impressing me with his overall consistent, knowledgeable characterization whenever he's just writing. I mean, good Lord, his Deceased characters, he understands the DC characters better in the dystopian crazy world of Deceased than Bendis had reading tons and tons of books on DC characters. I mean, he just gets it. He's earned it. And so Tom Taylor is to the extent that he's involved with Endless Winter, is he not?
So two things. One, for a second, I thought you said Tom King, and I was like, "Whoa!"
Tom Taylor.
No, Endless Winter is Ron Mars actually coming back to pen that with Andy Lanning, who was Dan Abnett's writing partner back when they were doing Marvel Cosmic stuff.
Lanning and Abnett are, it's funny. Lanning and Abnett, you know what? They have a claim to fame that few people talk about. Lanning and Abnett. They were, whenever DC is canceling a title, they would always put, and there's only 3 or 4 titles left, they would always put Lanning and Abnett on it. It seems back in the day, I remember that it became an inside joke, but they earned it. I mean, they got a lot of, and I mean that as a compliment, because they're really good at taking disparate plot points and weaving them together. And Ron Mars too. I mean, the guy's due. I think Ron Mars, I like to think he's due for a comeback. He's made he's ruffled some feathers. He's made some political comments on Twitter over the last 2 years. I don't care. I remember fondly his Green Lantern run. And in fact, I think he even wrote the famous, didn't he write the famous Women in Refrigerators issue with
Kyle?
Major Force, Kyle Rayner there.
Yeah, he also was the one that drove Hal Jordan insane during Emerald Twilight.
Oh, that's right.
And he invented Kyle Rayner. He's the creator of Kyle Rayner.
Yeah. Well, he's earned it. I mean, he's got my respect for that alone. So, and I like the fact that, letting him come back and sort of, play with in the sandbox again. Hey, man, I got no problem with that. I think he's more than earned that right.
Yeah, sure. I mean, to be honest with you, again, do I care about it that much? No. I mean, I'm also not shitting on it. I like Ron Mars. I mean, I would prefer that we live in a world where I'm excited to read DC's mainline and not all of these offshoots. But hey, we don't exactly live in the world I would ideally live in. So,
well, let me tell you what I think is positive about it and that I like about it. And what I like about Future State, the good thing about it is that in 2 months, and in comic book time, 2 months is not a long time. 2 months, we're going to have completed storylines. We can actually look forward to completed storylines in 2 months. And if they're good, we'll get more. And if they're not, we're not going to get more. That's something. That's important, quite frankly. And I don't think it's emphasized enough because, these 22, 40 issue events, come on. At least with Future State, they're extra thick. DC's that's marketing. I think it's going to be interesting to see. I think even the cover, the material, the paper quality on the covers might be a little different. Might even be a little bit more magazine feel like. It's going to be interesting to see what they experiment with. It's going to be a very interesting 2 months to see not only the comic books and the content and the stories, but to see the actual comic book itself, how it feels, the type of page. I haven't read anything about the specific quality of the type of paper that they're going to use. But I note, if you'll note that DC's last comic book, last thick one, it had a very strange feeling cover, and I wonder if they're trying something different. And it reminded me of some manga comics, manga / magazine like comics, and I'm wondering if they're experimenting with the materials as well. And in any event, same thing for Endless Winter. It's an event. It's going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And quite frankly, I like that. It's not going to be 39 issues like Justice League and have a non-ending. So
Sure.
that matters to me.
Now, my question to you is: it does having a wrapped up story mean more to you than having something that has consequence in continuity?
Well, I'll be blunt. If I've while there are always exceptions to a rule, I'm gonna double down on this anyway, and I'll say this straight up. I gotta make an executive decision here, so I'm not gonna be wishy-washy. I maintain that if a story ends, I'm not a big fan of cliffhangers. If you tell me a good one-shot story and I like the story, you think I'm not coming back for the next issue? I mean, good grief. If you tell me a great story and that's issue 4 and it ends, it's a beginning, middle, end, great one shot, you think I'm not going to buy issue 5? But there seems to be this mentality in DC and Marvel. No. And the writers, unfortunately, have that mentality too. Oh my God, I've only been hired for 6 issues. I better leave 5 or 6 dangling plot points at the end, so that if I sell reasonably well, they're going to keep me on for another 6 issues. It's like, just tell a good story, resolve everything, and then people, because a really good story, if it's done right and has an ending, will foster questions about the future of that character in the readership. That fosters the imagination. I mean, when people read The Dark Knight Returns, people wanted DK2, they wanted DK3. I mean, great stories engender replication, duplication. People want more.
Yeah, no, you make a good point. And overall, I'm with you. I mean, there is a part of me that would love to see evergreen stories be generated that are in continuity, that you can look to as a sort of part of the character's history and continuity. But ultimately, I'm with you. I mean, I would much rather just have good stories. I've been saying that for a long time now, probably since you and I have started this show. I've been saying over everything, I don't care what the fuck you do, as long as the story is good. So I can hear you on that. Samoki Dude says, and I this is back, I'm like 20 minutes behind, as I usually am on these comments. Refers back to when we were talking about Bruce Wayne and how Bruce Wayne doesn't trust people. He says he did trust Terry McGinnis. And I will answer you with another question. Did he have a choice? Was there another option other than Terry? If Bruce Wayne were willing and able, I guarantee you he was not letting Terry put on the suit. The only thing that opened Bruce's eyes to even potentially trusting Terry is that he had no other options. I guarantee you that if Dick Grayson in that continuity had come back and they had made up after Bruce knocking up Barbara, I guarantee you he probably would have let Dick be Batman. So, again, it depends on how you're sort of necessitating the situation for Bruce to step down, right? And in my mind, I don't think you can get Bruce Wayne to not be Batman unless he's not able to be Batman anymore. Unless you can dangle another cherry in front of him, which I think in some cases, I think you could make Bruce the Demon's Head. I do think that can happen. And I think he does try to reform it, or he could try to reform it in many ways. I think it'd be a very tricky story to tell, because you'd have to sort of dance on a tightrope for part of it. But I think that's a potential, and I think that might be another way he might let somebody be Batman. I mean, in my head, I do see a potential future where maybe Bruce becomes the Demon's Head, and maybe he just makes that the new Batman Inc. I don't know. DC, hire me. So we'll skedood on forward into some of these live chats here. John Thomas is just push a Robin out of the nest. I'm with you, man. It's the only way you get him to fly. Let's see. Tevye Smolka has a question. What about Wally's kids, Iris and Jay, becoming the new Flash after their father retires? Because that would be fantastic and tons of fun. Sure. Yeah. But, I think right now we're sort of tentatively looking at what comes after the current generation. And I don't think Iris and Jai come directly after Barry, certainly after Wally. I see them maybe being the direct predecessors to their father, maybe indirectly, maybe Wallace West or Bart takes over prior to them. I do very much think it's in their future. I mean, they were literally born to be Flashes. So yeah, I think it happens. But I think it's going to be a little bit further down the line. What do you think?
I well, I think it's a great. I love the Flash. I love the Next Generation, and the only beef I have, it's not really a beef. It's more of a preference. And again, my bias is I would like to have a group of a younger generation under 10, between the ages of 8 and 12. Of all the heroes having kids in that age. I just like that age group, and I admit, and I credit Grant Morrison for that, because when he first introduced Damian Wayne, I thought that was at first I thought it was, building on the Son of the Demon graphic novel back in the day. I actually questioned whether it was a good idea, but boy, was I wrong. I mean, he converted me, and then Peter Tomasi and Patrick Gleason with the writing of Damian made me love Damian. I always say Morrison brought Damian back, but more Gleason and Tomasi made me love him, and that age group I just love. And but now with DC's future state, I think they're really trying to push the Next Generation as being in the preteen to teenage, and that's all right, I guess. It's just I just thought that I think that there's some really interesting stories to be told, with letting. Heck, maybe even get, why not rock the boat? Why not have Jonathan Kent get Saturn Girl pregnant? Have a young infant, or rock the boat. I mean, if they're going to really represent the present generation, with the teenage pregnancy being what there is, who said all these heroes are responsible? Don't they? I doubt they're all virgins. I think we gotta let Garth Ennis write an issue of Future State. Maybe incorporate a little bit of the boys in there, and have Jonathan Kent go into a brothel and have some fun, and bang up some hooker and who gives birth to a superhero drug dealer.
Well, I think you're moving into some real 90s territory here.
90s?
It feels really 90s to me. We're just moving and shaking all over the place. Instead of getting like armor and stuff, everybody's just getting pregnant and high. I mean, I think you can certainly, sort of fluidize whatever happens next. And maybe, maybe things happen that are less than ideal. But oh shit, I had something in my head. Regarding like sort of aging up this sort of starting line for sidekicks or proteges, I think it's just a sort of response to like our ethics now. I think we're a little bit more socially conscious. It's already kind of trippy to get a 16-year-old fighting crime, but to get like an 8 to 10-year-old fighting crime, well, it's just, I think that's like one of Batman's biggest criticisms, right? Like in a movie nowadays, for example, you can't have a pre-teenage or even like an early teenage Robin, or else people are going to be shitting all over it. So I think that's sort of one of the biggest contributors, with very few exceptions, because some of these kids have freaking superpowers and could beat the shit out of the normal bank robber and not feel a thing. But,
I just find that, don't you find, though, it's a little bit of a cheat? Isn't it a little bit of a cheat that, I mean, Batman has all these legacy characters, Superman has these legacy characters, but they skip over the young years. We never actually see them as a young parent from ages. We never see the infants from ages 1 through 13. You know what I mean? Like they breeze over all that. Obviously, assuming that it's too boring. It makes for boring stories. We don't want to watch these heroes raise their children. That's boring and what have you. But I don't think it is boring. I don't think the marriage was boring between Clark and Lois. I don't think the marriage was boring between Peter Parker and Mary Jane.
Well, I mean, the only two opportunities you would have had to see them like raising a child from literally the ground up, or I should say the uterus out, were with Damian and John, right? Like they're the only direct sort of blood descendants of first generation characters. And with Damian, if you introduced Damian at birth, it wouldn't have worked. It simply would not have worked for Bruce. you had to introduce him at that point in time, at that point in Bruce's career, and at that point in his sort of and in that point of his life, in order to shake things up. I think that created the best story. John Kent just happens to be a product of convergence, and it was something that they never thought would stick. So I don't necessarily think that it was a conscious choice to not let Superman be a father. In fact, after John stuck around, there was a period in time where DC respected that and did want to watch Clark be a father. John was like, he was like 10 years old. So, I don't know if that's necessarily a consistency. I think we are moving in a direction where, DC readers are getting older and they want to see stories that reflect them. They want to see their heroes that they identify with being parents. So I don't know if it's necessarily a product of DC just not willing to commit, or that just really we haven't been given the time to see what happens. So, things can certainly change. Aunt Duhar says, in the pre-New 52, I was loving the direction that DC was going, where the legacy characters were taking over. So I feel that Future Shock, I think you mean Future State, could be that platform for legacy characters beyond the main continuity. Yeah, I mean, I think Boom and I have said, since the last conversation, that we think that there's certainly a potential here. Whether or not we think it's actually going to stick and become a tent pole of our continuity is another thing. And again, I'm all for the legacy characters. I think it's, the question is, who is becoming the next generation? How are they becoming the next generation, and why are they the next generation? Those are the three big things I think we need to sort of predicate these choices on. So I don't know. I mean, I do sort of lament that it feels like we had to take a big step back in order to move forward and in order to explore newer generations. But I think I prefer the way we were doing it pre-New 52, just because it felt so much more organic. It was just our characters that we know and love growing up and learning that they're not going to be doing this for forever, and that these proteges that they've trained for all this time are also growing up and are also sort of learning to redefine themselves as people and as their superhero identities. So, ideally, I wish we could have kind of considered more of that trend from pre-New 52. But I don't know, Boom, if you had to sort of work out how we move into that next generation, do you do it the sort of pre-New 52 route, as a sort of slow burn, right? I mean, it took a long time to get there. Or do we just say, let's fast forward, let's cut 10 years into the future, let's start with these new characters and maybe expose a little bit of what happened in between while we move forward? What would be more ideal for you?
Well, in fairness to, and in defense of Antijar's comments there, that the New 52, the first year of the New 52 was generally considered fairly successful. And then by most commentators' point of view, and in particular, Didio himself acknowledged, they sort of lost their way and they lost their grounding and they lost their connection to the zeitgeist of the characters that never found its footing again until Rebirth, and Jeff Johns sort of put things back on track. There's no reason why that can't be done right and that can't be maintained. And it's one thing that the New 52 did. I wasn't a big fan of the New 52. I like some things, but I won't belabor the point. But I will acknowledge that it was successful because at least they were consistent, and they for the first year anyway. And if they can maintain some degree of consistency and stick to it and maintain some continuity, I think that's important. Because here's the thing. I always sort of hold people accountable. When a new reader says to me, you're too beholden to continuity. Well, you know what? I challenge that reader. Anybody who says you're too beholden to continuity, oh, really? Read the same comic for a year and then you tell me you're not beholden to continuity. I've seen so many people. I know the guys at Weird Science. I love the guys at Weird Science. And they got into comics with the New 52. And now I remember their comments back when they started talking about the New 52, and they weren't aware of all the continuity and for the most part. And now they really notice it, because now they know so much more than they did back then. It's hard not to be passionate. Good stories create continuity-minded readership. That's the point of a successful hero is that you care about the history of the character. That's what brings people back. So, you know, DC's got to be careful that if you want to start with Future State, how do you do it? Well, you start off with the legacy characters, you start off with the present generation, you introduce the new one, you don't abandon continuity, you build on it, and you always need it there as the foundation. Just like Jeff Johns has said going into Rebirth, you need a template. You need that certain atmosphere and tone that you're trying to maintain.
Yeah, you make a good point, and I really want to stress what you said about how good stories create continuity-minded readers. I think the stories should be good enough, right, to where we say to ourselves, that needs to matter. That needs to be the thing that sticks. And that's shown, I think, countless times throughout publication history. I mean, Killing Joke was supposed to be a one-off thing. It was so popular that we were like, we as fans demanded that this matters, right? Dark Knight Returns, although it is still sort of a future Batman, I would say at least 8 out of 10 comic book readers point to that and say, that's the future of Batman. This is our definitive 55-year-old Batman doing his thing. So I agree in that sense. I do think that it just, first of all, we need to be focusing on creating good stories. And if they stick, they stick. And that's what matters, And Mark McKeever brings up an interesting sort of tidbit. Says that there was a scrapped DC event crossover that would have turned the legacy characters into new gods, letting the second generation characters take over. Yeah, I'd be okay with that. I think that it has, and for better or for worse, it has a very mythological feel to it. To me, like the original 7 ascend to a much higher sort of pedestal. The thing is I don't know if that really fits for all of those characters. I don't know if and again, I harp on Batman because I feel like I know him the best, but I don't know if Bruce takes to godlyhood super well. I don't know if he lets himself do that. I mean, we've seen countless times where he's avoided using performance enhancing drugs. He's avoided, being dipped in the Lazarus pit or revived, upon practically fatal injuries. So I think that would be a problem. And I also don't know if Clark would do it either, because I feel like he might feel out of touch with his humanity. I mean, he doesn't struggle as a reporter because he wants to struggle, right? He's there because he wants to be on the ground. He wants to be with people, and he wants to be exposed to the world in a very intimate way and have a reason to doing it. So for that reason, I think you could make that work. And I think, especially in an Elseworlds context, I think it has a really sort of interesting flavor to it. Again, makes it feel very mythological. It cements the DC's core characters as essentially like this American pantheon of gods. But I think from a character perspective, I think a lot of the Justice League would have problems doing that. I don't know. Boom. What do you think?
Well, first, I just want to. I think that's an excellent comment by Mark McKeever, and I think I should say and just remind him, and maybe he's thinking, maybe he thought of this already. In fairness to him, that in the pages of Justice League leading up to Justice to the Darkseid War. Yeah, the Justice League members did in fact attain some degree of godhood. I mean, Batman himself. It was very, in fact, one of the most. I did a review of the issue for the Heroic Universe back in the day when Batman sat on the Mobius chair. Batman, when he became a god, sitting on the Mobius chair, he went to such an extreme. His obsession with crime went so far. At one point he caught bank robbers before they even robbed the bank, and they were just thinking of robbing the bank, but he knew that they would because he had all the knowledge of the Mobius chair, and he punished them by transporting them to the Antarctic, even though they technically did not commit a crime. So it was a very interesting story, and it was because it made you think, well, if you're that obsessed with stopping crime, what if you had the knowledge of a god? And it was interesting how even Commissioner Gordon questioned Batman's motives. Why are you doing this? They didn't do anything wrong. They were going to. And it made sense that you take Batman's obsession and you take it to a godlike level. What does that look like? And I thought it was a very interesting way of looking at it. I think it was written by Jeff Johns, although I might be mistaken. But
it was.
I think think it makes us realize, and I think I agree with Mark McKeever that it's an excellent idea to expand more on that concept, because one of the differences, very traditional, common differences between Marvel and DC characters, that DC's characters are, of course, generally considered to be more mythological. Marvel heroes are more of the heroes next door, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's sort of building on that idea of the mythology and the godlikeness of the DC heroes. And I think that would be a great idea, of the first iconic heroes becoming gods, but then the generations below them eventually becoming closer to humanity. I think it's an interesting concept.
Yeah, like I said, I don't fault the concept. I think the concept could be really interesting. Again, I just, I look at some of these characters and I don't know if Clark would be comfortable with it, right? I feel like he already has a certain level of anxiety, essentially being a god amongst men. What if so how much more uncomfortable would that make him to be an even godlier god? And Bruce, like I said, when it came to him on the Mobius chair, right? He sat on it out of necessity. And essentially it functioned as a sort of addictive property. And even with something so heavily addictive, he willed himself out of it, right? So under that context, I just, again, I don't know if, and I'm sure I could make arguments for other characters. I don't think Diana would have a problem, but I think Bruce and Clark in particular would have a very difficult time ascending to such a sort of divine pedestal. Both of them for kind of sort of separate reasons, but I think they both sort of center back around their intuition with their humanity, big time. But I think, like I said, it has a really interesting flavor to it. I think it again brings to mind a number of sort of mythological tales throughout human history. So, am I against it? No, but I feel like they would have to address why characters like Bruce and Clark were suddenly willing to, walk away from their humanity.
Well, it forces, just to build on your point, and I like it because it forces the writer to come to terms with what their present interpretation of the character is, because you have to have a baseline. Because if you're going to make a character godlike, if you're going to take who this person is and suddenly make them a god, well, the only way you can write that person as a god is that you're going to have to know something about who that person is now. And I think that would be too challenging for most present writers for DC, because they don't have a very good handle on who the character is now.
Well, I think that's also could contribute to a problem. If you were to inorganically put these characters in that position and just let it slide, right, and have there be no consequences to such a sudden shift, is that especially right now, I don't trust DC to do that without providing any sort of tension around it. Like, again, sure, you can make this happen. Maybe they become the new gods out of necessity, but does it happen? Is it a smooth transition? I don't think so. And to me, the one thing I've always had a problem with comics, especially big two with the continuity, is that they'll have these editorial mandates like, you need to get Batman here. It's like, okay, but what if there isn't where Batman should be, right? And then it obviously comes up to the question is, who knows where Batman should be? It's going to be, I think, it's going to there. I think there are some objective points you could make, but for the most part, it's going to be subjective as to where Batman should be at X time because of X reason. So that's the thing that's always sort of bothered me, right? So if you say like, okay, Batman writer A, Bruce is going to become a new god X amount of issues from now. Yeah, but I was writing a story about Bruce Wayne becoming in touch with his role as a father to the extended family. It's like, no, he's going to be a god.
Yeah.
That's problematic, right? Because where we're going in this story, does it make sense for Bruce to become a god for anything other than maybe, a new hot first issue of Bruce with even glowier bad eyes that are going to sell the speculators,
I agree with you. And I just want to state for the record that the greatest future state story ever told has already been written, and it was called Kingdom Come. And that's the fact. And it's a beautiful segue, your comments, into the actions of Superman at the end of Kingdom Come, where that nuclear missile was about to hit and kill all the superheroes, and Shazam, Superman has his mouth on Billy Batson, and he tells young Billy Batson that, we're essentially, I'm paraphrasing. We're gods, but Billy Batson, you're both human and a hero. You're both human and superhero. Therefore, you have to make the choice. I'm not going to make this choice. You decide our fate, basically. And that's when he lets go, and young Billy Batson says Shazam, and Shazam, despite being corrupted by Lex Luthor, and risks his life and sacrifices himself, choosing to save humanity. And that's Superman refusing to be a god. Superman didn't destroy the United Nations. He refused to make the decision for humanity. He let somebody who was closer to being human, young Billy Batson, make that call. And it's a beautiful talk about how Superman resisted the godhood. And even, Wonder Woman arguably was very aggressive, which I kind of liked. And Batman, Bruce Wayne, I mean, even Batman maintained his humanity ultimately in the end.
And I think that's very important. And that's sort of one of them. And you make, like, Kingdom Come was an excellent example. But I think it goes along with what I sort of believe in about those characters. I think that a lot of them would really have difficulty sort of making that transition.
And another shout out, it was written, or at least co-written, by Mark Waid. And Mark Waid, over the 2 months that we're getting Future State, we know Mark Waid's writing something. So what is Mark Waid going to be writing? I'm excited about that. I don't care. I don't care about Mark Waid's past, this controversy, blah, blah, blah. The guy knows Superman and the guy knows DC. I'm looking forward to it.
For sure. You make a good point there. Smoky Dude says, well, what about when Thomas told him that he should stop being Batman? What about it? Did it stop Bruce from being Batman? I mean, I mean, death, I don't think really even stops Bruce Wayne from being Batman. Will his father telling him not to? I don't quite know where we're getting at there. But Paul Baker, kind of bringing it over onto the Marvel side here, says that Marvel's been doing the raising kids from the ground up with a lot of their heroes. Luke Cage and Jessica Jones' kid is a great example. You make a point there, but where I'll sort of give you pushback is how much spotlight are they giving that? I mean, how much are we hearing about, first of all, how much are we hearing about Luke Cage and Jessica Jones at all since the Netflix shows have been canceled? I don't think Marvel has really given them the time of day at all, let alone their child. To be frank with you, Paul, I don't even know what the name of their child is. So whether or not it's happening, in the background or we're getting exposed to this, I think are sort of two different things, right? I mean, Boom, how are you feeling about this? Like, do you feel like just sort of, getting that train moving and letting it happen off screen is enough?
Well, I guess it's that old cliche, show don't tell, right? I would prefer to see it. Also, in fairness to Paul Baker, I mean, the guy, I know he reads a lot of Marvel, certainly more Marvel than you and I read. Marvel might, in fact, I know I don't know how much I read the review copy sometimes that I have access to from time to time, and I know that I think it's the New Mutants is, in the mutant universe, the X-Men universe, there's a lot of younger characters. And that's in fact, that's one of the reasons why I'm slowly getting into the X universe just a little bit, because I kind of like they have a younger demographic there, some young adventures, and they do have, I think the X-Men legacy of characters is really good. That's where that's one of Marvel's strengths. And it's Jonathan Hickman, I think, has done a good job with building on that legacy and creating his own sort of science fiction approach to it. And I think Marvel, Luke Cage and Jessica Jones, I love, and even despite the failure of the TV show, I think that their characters, whenever they're in an Avengers comic, I generally always end up reading it because they ground the comic, and there's always something great when you have it. Well, in fact, with Luke Cage and Jessica Jones, they actually have something in common with Batman. They're both, well, largely human. Luke Cage has some metahuman abilities, I guess, but
so does Jessica.
What's that?
So does
Jessica. But they're street level heroes. I get what you're saying, but they still feel more like Daredevil to me, and that's why I just love those characters so much. I like the Defenders. I actually loved Bendis' last work. His last work when he left Marvel was 10 issues of the Defenders, with Jessica, with Luke Cage, Jessica Jones, Iron Fist. And it was amazing. It was really good. It was the best, probably the best Bendis had written in 5 years at Marvel. It was amazing. Drawn by David Arquez. I would highly recommend it. Action packed, good story, Kingpin involved. It was great.
Speaking of Marvel, what's interesting is in comparison to DC, I actually think it's a lot more. I think it's a lot more probable that the first generation step aside and let somebody else move forward. Whereas DC, I think, I mean, aside from the fact that I think you could make the argument that a majority of like DC's first generation characters could potentially be immortal, if not close to being immortal. I think that Marvel's characters sort of almost cater to stepping aside for a new generation more. I don't, I do think we live in a world where Captain America, Steve Rogers, could step aside and feels able and ready and willing to do that. I think there's a world where Tony sort of sets up his own sort of contingency plan for a new Iron Man, and I think you could go on, if I do also think there's a world where Peter would step aside from being Spider-Man. I think the exception might be Thor. I think Thor is going to be that present sort of old man of the group that never truly grew up in the way that he should have. But bringing up Marvel, I do think that it's a lot more almost feasible knowing those characters and knowing that world to see the next generation sort of make their own stamp. Do I think it's going to happen? I don't know. There's a little thing called money involved, but it almost feels sort of from a world building and from a narrative perspective more likely. I don't know. What do you think about that?
What specific point? Think about.
So I feel like there's something about Marvel's, the current generation of Marvel characters and the world that they live in and the Marvel universe at large, that it feels a little bit more likely for this first generation to step aside and sort of willingly let the next generation take over rather than it happening out of necessity, which is, what I feel like would be more probable in the DC universe.
Yeah, Marvel's done a better job of it, in my view, because what Marvel has done, it feels, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Marvel necessarily has better stories all the time. I'm saying Marvel's done a better job because Marvel's legacy characters they seem to be more comfortable. They're more alongside the Marvel heroes. They don't necessarily, it just, I don't know. For some reason, Marvel has this arrogance that seems to work for Marvel more than it works for DC, where Marvel, if you don't like the continuity of Marvel just ignores your criticisms and they go ahead and do it anyway. If you don't like One More Day, Marvel says, well, we know it's a continuity nightmare. Just ignore it. We're going to go and tell these stories. We're just going to focus on this. We're going to undo the marriage. We're just going to make it work. We're going to renew your vows. We're going to add Mary Jane and Peter Parker are going to get married in this side universe. And then we're going to create, we're going to have a Spider-Girl in this other verse. Then we're going to create our own multiverse, and we're going to have Spider-Verse, and we're going to have Spider-Verse characters, and we're going to have the Ultimate Universe, and then we're going to merge it with our mainstream 616 universe, and then we're going to separate them again, then we're going to put them back together again, then we're going to have a Secret Wars, and somehow it works at Marvel. Somehow they manage to, you can still actually pick up a Marvel event, and yeah, it's too bloody long, but if you just collect that event, you can enjoy it. I mean, I thought Secret Wars was a crazy event, but I understood it. I collected all the issues. I enjoyed it. I had fun with it. And then I stopped, and then so I find you can get into it. You can get into a Marvel event in the Marvel universe in a way that, it's just different than DC. I'm not going to say it's better because I'm a lifelong DCer, but there is something about the groundedness of the characters that makes their legacy feel different. And maybe it's because of the Godhood. Maybe it's because of the mythology of the Trinity that makes legacy feel different in the DC universe than it does in the Marvel universe. I don't know. What do you think?
Like I said, I think it's really just based on the characters and sort of the atmosphere around the universes they live in. Again, like I said earlier, part of it is the fact that Superman is practically immortal. Wonder Woman is immortal. I'm sure a Flash could technically make themselves immortal. Green Lantern. I'm sure that holding the ring will prolong their lives. Whereas in DC, in Marvel, Peter Parker's going to get old. Tony's going to get old. Steve, sure, like he was frozen in ice, so and that along with the super soldier serum slowed his aging, but he's going to get old eventually. So I think that's a big part of it, and I think a part of it is just who those characters are, right? I don't think Batman steps aside. I don't necessarily think Diana steps aside unless she's sort of at the behest of a bigger calling. She's like, okay, I'm going to leave the whole Wonder Woman thing to you. This is small potatoes. I'm going to go be the new, goddess of blank, or the new queen of Themyscira, or the new this. And I think that could be said about a lot of those characters for the most part. But with Marvel, I think there's something about the relationships between the first generation and second generation characters where I feel like there is not only a trust between them, but just I think this willingness to move on from those superhero identities. Cap has two people he trusts in Cap and in Bucky and Sam. Iron Man, I'm sure he'd figure something out. Again, Thor is my exception. If we're still in a world where Miles is in the main universe, I do think that Peter lets Miles do it. In fact, I've been saying it for a long time that I think Miles should be a Spider-Man. And Wolverine has Laura Kinney and so on and so forth. I mean, I don't think Wolverine really wants to be Wolverine. I think he does it out of instinct and out of necessity. So I think you could sort of go on about Marvel's A-list characters where obviously these roles are very important to them, but I think that for most of them, there would come a time where they say, okay, in some way or another, they go, I'm too old for this shit, So I can't even really explain it super thoroughly. I don't know. It's just the sort of vibe that it gives off. And I guess moving on into some more of these live comments here, the Helium 29 says Superman being a dad, best thing ever. Great. Bruce Wayne being a dad, best thing ever. Great. Especially to their own biological children. Here's where I give you pushback. I think that Bruce Wayne and Clark Kent would be good dads to their surrogate children just as much as they would be to their own blood. In fact, I think Bruce Wayne so far has been a better dad to Dick Grayson and Tim Drake than he has to Damian Wayne, for better or for worse. I'm not a fan of that, but continuity shows it. Especially with Clark and Bruce, they were raised in essentially adopted families. So I don't think, to me, that they would prioritize their more optimal parenting to their blood children. I don't think it makes a difference to them, and I don't think it should. Like I said, Bruce was raised by Alfred. Bruce's father, for all intents and purposes, is Alfred Pennyworth, but it's his adopted father. But you don't really bat an eye. You don't think about it as much. Jonathan and Martha Kent were Clark's adopted parents, and they raised him as if they were her own. And I don't think it means anymore for Bruce and Clark to be to especially focus on parenting their own biological kids. I think, those are their families. To me, Clark has always been a little bit more of an older brother to Connor, but to me, the Bat family, those are almost all Bruce's kids to me, except for with the exception of Barbara Gordon and maybe Stephanie Brown. But I don't think it means anymore for them to be parents to their biological kids versus their.
Let me give you a little bit of pushback there, Dark Knight.
Sure.
And maybe not so much pushback, but with all these children, stepchildren, one biological child, what they all have in common with Batman is that Batman really never had much of he never experienced the childhood of Damian. He only knew he had a son or whatever. He met Damian when Damian was 10 years old. All of Batman's children, all of them at some degree have had some trauma in their life. He came upon them through their trauma.
Yeah.
Dick Grayson, from his parents were killed. Even Tim Drake had life on the streets and tried robbing the Batmobile, and even Barbara Gordon. I mean, Barbara Gordon arguably didn't, but all of his family have some degree of trauma. One thing Batman doesn't have, really, and this is what I was kind of looking forward to when there was earlier talk about Batman having a daughter, is wouldn't it be interesting to see Bruce Wayne as a parent with a child from birth that he could control whether or not that child would ever have a trauma? Like a trauma-free baby. Here it is. Bruce Wayne, you're a billionaire. You're a billionaire. You're Batman. You got this beautiful bouncing baby daughter. What, how is that going to affect you? And it would be an interesting dynamic. And of course, I think the powers that be think that would just be boring. But the only trauma-free child is John Kent. John Kent was born from the beginning, and it would appear Princess Andy in the future state. So I kind of like that idea. That, to me, if the present generation of heroes are successful, that means the next generation of heroes should be born trauma-free. Their origins should not be grounded in trauma. Not if the heroes are doing their job.
Well, I think that, first of all, even if a hero does their job, I think there are some things that are just unavoidable. Like no matter how good your parents are, you're always going to have your own sort of core wounds.
But I'm talking about murder. I'm talking about the type of angst and sure. You know what I'm talking about.
But specifically with Batman, one thing that I actually, on whether or not this Batman Catwoman book is going to be in continuity by Tom King, is that they've revealed that Catwoman's going to be pregnant with Bruce Wayne's kid. And I have a real problem with that, actually. I don't like that.
You don't like Batman having sex? What's wrong with you?
No, I don't like the fact that Bruce Wayne has a kid when he's not done being a parent to 10 other kids, right? Like, Bruce Wayne hasn't been a good dad to, like, any of his kids in continuity in the last couple of years, largely due to Tom King. Thanks, Tom. But
he's never learned how, though. He's not the first time. His first exposure to a kid is when he was 10 years old. He's never raised an infant child.
But I don't think he needs to raise an infant child, though. I don't think Bruce Wayne, like, to me, first of all, the fact that Bruce Wayne has taken on so many sort of child figures in his life, I think gives him great anxiety because he doesn't trust himself to be a good father. Would he willingly have another kid? Right? Like, would he willingly put himself in that situation again when he's not done with the rest of these kids? I mean, for Christ's sakes, we haven't had, any really good stories in a long time where Bruce reconciles the fact that he wasn't there for the first 10 years of Damian's life. I mean, we haven't had it since Tomasi and Gleason. Like, I think before Bruce has another kid, he needs to reconcile these other relationships. It's just irresponsible. And it's just not something to me that Bruce Wayne would do. Like, aside from the fact that we haven't fleshed out what his relationship with Cassandra Cain is in the current climate. We haven't fleshed out his relationship with Stephanie in the current climate. He hasn't spent time with Tim Drake since Detective Comics and Tynan's run, but there was never really any what's the word I'm looking for? Not conclusion. I don't know what the word I'm looking for. Huh?
There's been no evolution.
Right. And so to me, I just think that, like, sure, maybe you put Bruce in a situation where he's ready and willing to have another kid, but not before he's reconciled all of the other relationships that are still half-assedly standing in front of him. And regarding Bruce being a father, yeah, I think he does know how to be a father. He was raised by Alfred, who's like the best father in the DC universe. But to me, the anxiety for Bruce is whether or not he can live up to what Alfred was to him. And I think that would give him anxiety. I've talked about it multiple times. To me, Bruce as a father would fail. And there's not overall, but he would have his failures as a father. And I think that would keep him up at night. Because he, in this sense, in the same way that his kids are trying to look up or trying to live up to his shadow, I think as a father, he tries to live up to Alfred's shadow. And I think that would be a very sort of persistent thing for Bruce in his personal life and in his psychology. So that's why I don't think it's time for Bruce to have another kid, because he's not done raising what he has now. And he's not even really in current continuity started with most of them, so yes, I think it's a possibility. I think, once Bruce feels like he's in a good spot in his relationship with the tens of other kids he already has, maybe he does have a daughter and he tries to do it right from the beginning. But until then, I think I would much rather see him spend time with the rest of the family, reconcile those relationships. I mean, I've talked about it with you in private. My ideal Batman run is literally Bruce spending time and reconciling all of those relationships that have been broken and beaten, and really, for some of them, not even really fully formed. I think that's important. I don't think Bruce goes out of his way to have another kid until those sort of relationships are mended to some degree. That's just me.
I understand the point you made. I guess, not to oversimplify it, but there's a difference when it's your own kid and it's your own flesh and blood, and you're there from the beginning. It would be a different dynamic altogether. And I don't know, like, I guess how many times every single writer, that story's been done 1,000 times, hasn't it? Batman coming to terms with Barbara Gordon, with Jason Todd, with Spoiler, with and an argument with Cassandra Cain. I mean, this has been done again and again and again and again and again and again and again, and it's been the subject matter of more than one storyline in bits and pieces and here and there. And I've no doubt that it's destined to one day be written better, possibly even by you, Dark Knight. And I look forward to that. But honestly, I just, there's a difference between, I think, having Batman's daughter be there from the beginning, a daughter of Batman and Catwoman. I think that's a whole new ball game. I really do. It has, in my view, it just opens things up, especially in keeping with what we're talking about here, legacy moving forward.
But there's a couple there. I mean, there's, I think, multiple caveats to that. One of which being, when's the last time we had a story where he's reconciled with Cass or Steph or Duke or Tim or Dick or Damian? Like, I mean, even within the last 5 years, there's really not one. I mean, like, he had his Tim Drake story in Detective, but did they really reconcile? Really? Like, you know what I mean? So I think that's the thing, is that, one, you don't really see that much. Two, you don't really see it done well. Three, you don't see it stick. I don't think that it's just one little one-off story, one wonderful annual, or one-shot issue in the middle of the run where they take a break from the main plot of a story and have a very deep and intimate character moment. Does that one moment heal all the wounds? I mean, is it that simple?
But I would put to you that I think what's really bothering you is the fact that there's just most of the stories you've read that have dealt with those things you're just not happy with, and that's fair. But I would say to you, I would submit to you that you wouldn't want a story where that level of reconciliation would occur. You can have it, but a genuine family is always going to have drama in it. There's always going to be ups and downs and hills and valleys. So the minute you resolve one issue, especially if you have a crime-fighting life like Batman with all this the crap that goes on in their lives, you're going to have drama that's going to come up again and again and again.
Yeah.
There's been stories where there's been great Cassandra Cain Batman stories. I remember back in the classic.
Are they in continuity though?
And there was some great moments between Cassie and Batman when she was getting to know her father and Lady Shiva. There was those moments. Well, certainly in Joker War, there's some decent ones there. Or pardon me, Three Jokers.
Yeah, okay, but here's the thing: is that none of those cast stories exist anymore. They don't exist. I mean, the last real thing we saw with Batman and Cass was Bruce letting Cassandra live in the rafters of an opera house. I mean, that's the thing. Sure, we've had him 25, 30 years ago, but A, they don't exist anymore. And B, it's like all of this, the last like handful of times we've seen Bruce interact with any one of these kids, it's a strained relationship. It's not like they're a family and they have their squabbles or even sort of real bits of drama as a family. They're not even really the family. I mean, you know what I mean? We haven't seen a real reconciliation. The problems that Bruce has with this family is total and utter, like, lack of connectivity. I mean, when's the last time you really acknowledged the spoiler in any real way? She's not really a part of the family. They just kind of say she is. Cassandra and Bruce, I mean, I don't even remember the last time Cassandra and Bruce had a conversation in a comic book. So that's sort of my point, is that we haven't even gotten them to the point where you've developed them as a family, having family problems, and sort of, I would say, obviously, very specialized problems due to the lifestyle they live. They're not even a family. And that's the problem that I have right now, is we're not even at the point where you can have the family drama. They're just having drama. So
maybe we'll get some of that in future state. I won't hold my breath, but maybe we'll get. It'll be interesting to see what's in store for Batman. It looks like he's going to have a rough time of it in future state detective comics, though.
Yeah, we will definitely see, and I definitely want to move past the Batman stuff, because I always get sucked into Batman conversations, but that's 100% my fault. I get way too into them. But I think, let's sort of ask the question. We've talked a lot about, I think, the fact that we seem to be ready for the next generation of DC characters to pick up on the mantles and to take the stage. Now, we brought about one possibility, right, of the primary DC characters becoming the new gods and stepping out of the way. But for you, Boom, we've already gotten past the fact that you're ready for a new generation. How do you think we shepherd out the first generation, and how do we organically bring in this new generation?
Well, I alluded to it already when I in my first comment. As far as shepherding out the old one, I don't see the old one as going away. They just get older. I mean that maybe that sounds like a boring plot point, but I mean, they get older. But just because you get older doesn't mean you don't still have adventures. You might be more of a mentor, or you might. I mean, quite frankly, even looking at future state, it looks like Superman's future. He's still going to be arguably even more active than he is now. So, they can. I think the key is that what I want to know, if you're gonna, whatever the future for the first generation of heroes, for the original Trinity, where are they now, and what have they learned, and what did they leave behind, and how do they feel about it? And you made some good points, like about Batman. We talked enough about Batman, but even Superman or Wonder Woman. How does Wonder Woman feel about her legacy? How does she feel about this new generation? Did she succeed in her mission in the future? There's a third tribe of Amazons that was introduced in Wonder Woman Annual number 4, and it's located, obviously, I think, in Brazil, or the Brazilian Wonder Woman. What about Wonder Woman's legacy? Is she being replaced? Does Wonder Woman feel like a failure? She's older. What is her legacy? Is she still the goddess of truth, or what does she stand for really? What is Wonder Woman? What is, when Wonder Woman thinks of retiring or thinks about her future? What is she doing? How does Wonder Woman think of her future? Does she want to be queen? Is she queen of the Amazons in the future? Does she just want to? What did she accomplish for humanity? What is ultimately her goal here? What do the Brazilian Amazons want with this new Brazilian Wonder Woman? Those types of things, because all the questions that you have for Superman or Batman or Wonder Woman or Green Lantern, or the Green Lantern Corps, the legacy of the Green Lantern Corps, John Stewart in the future, according to Future State, they're going to lose their rings, and they're going to have to find out their weapons, it looks like. So they're going to, so their ingenuity, are you still a Green Lantern, heroic Green Lantern, if you don't have a ring? I mean, it's interesting. So it's challenge. The future is challenging these modern day heroes with new ideas, and that's what you got to do. That's how you usher. That's how you can still age up. Because let me tell you something: the better I get as I get older in certain areas of my life, all that means is that I'm capable of handling more. And guess what? The more you're capable of handling, the more life throws at you, man. Let me guarantee you that. The better I get at something, the more of it's that is thrown at me. If I get better at time management, that just means I'm doing more work, not less. You know what I mean? And the same thing is for these heroes, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. If they're better, that only means they're battling more, I think.
Yeah. It's weird because again, I just, I think that there is definitely, I mean, there are a handful of ways you could shepherd in this new generation, but I don't know if DC's A-list just willingly step aside, and I already spoke my piece about Batman. I think he's too stubborn and too sort of devoted to the cause to step aside, but I think a lot of these characters might have a problem, stepping away and giving up the reins because it's theirs, right? It is something that for the most part, depending on the continuity, with the exception of a few characters, it's something that they created. It's something that they started. It is something that ultimately represents them, right? They are the impetus behind the change, and behind heroism. So I think it could become difficult. I don't know if it's as easy as the old generation just retiring. um, I think in some cases it is, and I think it's going to be different on a case-by-case basis. And I already talk long enough, so I'm not going to go into, how is it going to happen for Hal Jordan or for Clark or, it's going to change from character to character. I just think that at the end of the day, whatever happens, it needs to be story-driven, and that story needs to pay respect, obviously, to the generation that, for all intents and purposes, started it all. I know, somebody could say, oh, but the JSA technically started it all. Yeah, sure. But under the context of the Earth Prime continuity, these characters are the sort of impetus behind superheroism. And so I think that whatever you do, there has to be a good reason for it, and it has to jive well with continuity. And again, it has to make sure it's done in light of these characters' histories and their continuities and their characterization up until now. So I'm kind of curious because I feel like my answer has been a little bit more sort of linear across the board, but Boom, if you had to take like a handful of DC's A-list and then maybe a handful of Marvel's A-list, do you literally just let the second, in the same way that I said that I was due for the most part, do you just let the next generation take over, or would you sort of cherry pick who you think is going to be the best candidate for the job coming up next? Like what would be your rationale behind picking the next generation of characters to take up the mantle? And if you have any in mind, who would you pick?
Who? That's a quite a broad question. I would. Okay, I'll just dive right in. I would have a younger generation of heroes. The thing is, what in my view, what categorizes the youth is that the present generation always thinks that the older generation did it wrong, and they're always smarter than the older generation. Because they look and they say, I can do it better than that. Look how they screwed it up. Look how our parents screwed it up. Look how they did this. Obviously some of us love and respect our parents, but there's always a part of us that says, they should have done this, they should have done that, they could have done this, they could have done that. So quite frankly, I see the next generation of Batman, whether it's if it's Damian. I mean, Damian already has that attitude. He loves his dad, but he's better than dad. He's not going to make the same mistakes as dad. And he's going to dive in and make 10 times more mistakes because he doesn't realize, and I would have a writer that appreciates that it's everybody, it's always easy to criticize how people were in the past, another generation. But when you are knee deep in the trenches, you find for yourself that, history tends to repeat itself. And if it doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. I think Damian would find out that he's much more like his father than he realizes, and that there are some things you can't change, and that when you engage in a certain lifestyle, you can do things different, but you're still a product of what it is that you do. And so diving right in, the younger generation of heroes, I think they would be inspired, but they always I would want to put some arrogance in there. I want some new generation of heroes that have a little bit of maybe pie in the sky mentality, thinking we're better, we can do this, we're not going to make the same mistakes, and then have them maybe raise the stakes and then maybe bring them down to earth and then maybe be saved a little bit. But also propped up by the newer, that the old isn't completely used up yet. Give the older generation some time in the sun as well, because I know that and I keep going back to my mentors. The best mentors are the ones that let you shine and they help you and they have no ego. They got nothing vested in it. It's like my mentor said, he gets to watch. He's there to prop up, but when the shit hits the fan, he steps back because it's my fight. It's my fight. It's my life. He doesn't, they can give you the tools. Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, they give the next generation the tools, but how they use it, Superman especially, Wonder Woman especially, they'll step back and let him, I think an older Bruce Wayne would be inclined to hop in the fight with them, but I think Clark and Diana would hold him back and say, no, let them make their mistakes. You got to have faith and trust in them. You got to let them make the errors, because that's what we did, and we turned out okay. We got to trust that the younger generation will too.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty interesting point. And what's the funny thing is I think for my rationales for choosing my like preferred next generation of legacy characters for DC and Marvel are totally different. For me, DC, it has such a history of their legacy characters that I think it just makes sense to move on to, the first generation sidekicks, but for Marvel, it's a little bit different because there's not as much of a sort of generational gap for the most part. Like to me, the logical replacement for Peter isn't like his potential daughter with Mary Jane. It's Miles. I think Peter gives up being Spider-Man, before his daughter is even old enough to take up the mantle. And maybe it happens eventually, but I do think that Miles is the logical next choice to be Spider-Man if he's still in 616 continuity, and I think that Steve does give up the mantle. I think Steve would probably be more than happy to stop being Captain America and just live by his ideals as a citizen, and so on and so forth. So it's interesting. I feel like if I were going through and selecting the successors of Marvel, I would be almost cherry picking it a little bit more. I might even pick characters that aren't traditionally in those roles. I'd be like, you know what? I think this character might be an interesting fit for this role because they embody the sort of ideals behind it. Or maybe they don't, right? Maybe it's just interesting enough story to say, let's put this character in this really uncomfortable situation and see how they live up to it. Whereas with DC, I think it is just, there is almost I don't want to say a hierarchy, but there's a there's like a family, there's like a tree, there's like a legacy tree, because although Dick is to me the Batman after Bruce, the Batman after Dick is Damian. I won't take any arguments about it. There's no gap between Dick becoming Batman and Damian becoming Batman. Yeah, okay, so I said that right. For a second, I thought I said Bruce. And it's going to change from role to role, but I think largely we need to see DC in a different context. Marvel, still the same, but DC especially, I think, just because they have such a well-developed body of legacy characters, and I think that's what sort of differentiates it. I think we could spend more time with more of Marvel's current generation, but with DC, it's like, man, we've spent time. And even though it's sort of in the far flung past for the most part, we spent a lot of time developing these characters to sort of measure them up psychologically, emotionally, and physically to their mentors. Why not give them the opportunity to prove themselves or to fail? Right? Because I feel like we've just organically already built towards that over time. So, for my money, I think that's why I'm sort of justifying just linearly moving forward in the DC universe, whereas Marvel, again, just sort of taking people and plopping them in the role. Although, again, some of them are sort of strictly legacy characters. And as we're closing out, we'll address a couple of these live chats and then boot on out of here. Because, we have the tail end of a shitty presidential debate to catch up to. Regarding, I think, our conversations on Cass and the Bat family earlier, Paul Baker says, so what you're saying is that we have to undo Flashpoint so that Batman can finally move forward in his relationships, especially with Cass and Steph, who only exist in their new 52 forms. I'm in. And I think somebody else did something sort of similarly to him regarding undoing like Flashpoint in the New 52. No, I'm not saying that at all. Actually, I think it would be sloppy to do that because it happens. Like DC has made its bed, you got to sleep in it. It doesn't mean that you can't redevelop those relationships. And I think that would actually be interesting under these modern contexts of redeveloping these relationships. And what I find particularly interesting is that at some point in Rebirth, DC was like, oh, we're merging the New 52 and the pre-New 52 continuities during Superman Reborn, right? They were like coming together. And we haven't seen those ramifications. And I think that's what's really weird is that they're playing very fast and loose, not surprisingly, with what they're pulling from old continuity and what they're not. Yeah. And I think that's kind of a problem because there are moments where in current continuity, like just specifically regarding like Cassie's relationship with Bruce, they refer to No Man's Land. It happened. Like Cataclysm happened. Gotham was rocked by an earthquake. And yet Bruce Wayne's relationship with Cassandra Cain still stands as a product of Batman and Robin Eternal from the New 52. So I think it makes that sort of nebulous, but largely no, I wouldn't erase Flashpoint. I wouldn't erase the New 52. I think first of all, I would follow up on the fact that we've merged these continuities and actually give weight to something they've actually done. They've actually shown it happen, and maybe consolidate, whatever good came out of the New 52 and what good came out of pre-New 52. But if my options were either completely eradicating the New 52 and Flashpoint and just going back to those relationships or moving forward, I'd just say we move forward. I'd say we redevelop those relationships in a new context. But that's just me. But like I said, ideally, I'm a fence sitter, man. I just say you do what we said we were going to do in Reborn and smash those two continuities together, and then we take what we want out of it. I don't know, Boom. How do you feel as an old time fan? Do you just obliterate Flashpoint?
Yeah, I view Paul Baker's comments. Paul Baker and I direct message every now and then on Twitter, and he's quite knowledgeable. He educates me on all things X-Men quite often. And I read his comment there to be a little sarcastic. Maybe I've read it wrong, but I see some sarcasm in his comment a little bit. And maybe it's because I'm a slightly older school, but I even though Flashpoint was a good story, I didn't like what Flashpoint led to. I didn't like Flashpoint while I read it. I liked it better once the cartoon came out. I was never been a Flashpoint lover, quite frankly. And so Flashpoint for me is always, I remember Flashpoint as leading to the New 52. That's how come I have bad memories of Flashpoint. And the New 52, for me, it took away all the versions of the characters that I loved prior to Flashpoint. The pre-Flashpoint DC universe, I loved because that was still, post John Byrne's Man of Steel, 1986, all the way up to Flashpoint, was essentially one universe, throw in a 0 hour here and there, but it was still one continuity. In my mind, it made sense to me. But look, at the end of the day here, I'm going to just go back to my earlier comment, and that is that, tell me a good story, and have it make sense. Don't be afraid to have the heroes grow, because one thing that Batman's right now, our Batman stories, whether it's Tom King, whether it's Snyder, whether it's Morrison, whether it's anybody, he's in this perpetual loop. And the same types of stories are being told again and again, and they're told very well sometimes, and we get some gems, but it's okay to move them forward. And who's to say he always has to be obsessed? Does Batman? I mean, isn't it interesting that Batman's the great hero and he's the most intelligent, second most intelligent man on the planet, and we still think he's going to be obsessed in the future? He's never going to lose his obsession with crime. He's never going to choose happiness. He's never. I mean, it's such a. I mean, holding you accountable, and this isn't a criticism; it's just an observation because it's a legitimate interpretation of that character carrying forward. But I personally, and I know this is going to be totally misinterpreted, but I'm going to say it anyway. But I like Tom King's idea of exploring a happy Batman, because I don't think that's outside the realm of a possibility. And I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, I get where you're coming from. But I think that if you have a successfully happy Batman, you remove his character flaws. Like I honestly, I think
when he's older, but he's older. He's in the future. This is if he's 50 or 60 years old.
But I'm
and it
saying
took
like
60 years to get there. I mean, you can't really say that was he didn't have flaws.
But I'm saying that if you do it while he's still physically able to be Batman, I don't think it works. I think you deprive him of everything that makes him flawed. And if Batman isn't flawed, well, then I don't really want to read the story. If a character isn't flawed at all, I don't want to read the story because it deprives you of any potential for them to develop themselves and to learn. Right?
What if he's a mentor though? He becomes a mentor. What about can't he be a happy Batman and mentor a next generation?
Sure, yeah, when he's physically not able to be Batman anymore, but I just don't think that there's a circumstance where Bruce Wayne willingly gives up being Batman. And whether or not that's because, of his ego or because he is just so committed, and I mean, let's be real. I mean, his psyche, for all intents and purposes, is practically shattered. He is Batman. Like, there have been countless iterations where Bruce in particular identifies himself mentally as Batman and not Bruce Wayne. And I think that sort of, I don't even want to call it a stranglehold. I think the relationship that Batman and Bruce Wayne have inside of Bruce Wayne's psyche are almost one and the same. And so because of that, I don't think Bruce just gives it up. And I think that even if he were to stick around as a mentor figure, I think it's because it's the only alternative for him. I think it's because he can't be Batman anymore. And I think that he's happy to be the mentor figure for sure. But I think he's happy to be the mentor figure because he knows he's the only one that could be the mentor figure for the next generation. He knows that he's the man with the plan. And I don't think that he's convinced that anybody else could do a better job than he could mentoring the next generation because he's the goddamn Batman. And so I guess where I'm sort of going with this is that, like, yes, eventually I think you could have a world where Bruce Wayne is not Batman. And in fact, I want it because I'm tired of DC diluting the brand, of Bruce Wayne as Batman. But I think that it's just one of his flaws that I don't think you can justifiably cure him of completely, because without it, he's practically perfect. I mean, if you have a happy, well-adjusted Bruce Wayne, there's literally nothing wrong with him. There's nothing. And so while I don't think you always need to lean into it super heavily and make him this emotionally stunted guy that just refuses to grow up, I do think that no matter where you leave Bruce Wayne in time, there will always be that obsession in him. And it's going to be to different degrees, but I still think it has to exist because without it, he's perfect. And I don't want to read a story about a perfect Batman, because the reason I read Batman to begin with is because he has some personal growth to go through. So where I see where you're coming from, and I think that a happy Bruce Wayne can be explored, I don't think we ever get to a world where Batman is so content that he says, I'm done being Batman. I think that Bruce Wayne will eventually come to grips with the fact, if all goes well, that he's too old to be Batman, that he just physically can't be there. And he will be happy to be the guy in the chair because he knows that he has the experience and the know-how to be the best guy in the chair. But to me, there's no way like a 40 to 45-year-old Batman who's still physically able to do it says, I'm done. That's just me. I think that obsession, no matter how well adjusted you can make Batman plausibly, I still think there's a part of that obsession there. But before I border on making this a conversation entirely about Batman, I do want to thank everybody so much for joining the conversation. You guys were a huge part of keeping this discussion going. You guys added a lot of really interesting insights. I know we're not always able to showcase all of them, but clearly Comic Boom and I will find a comment and we'll talk about it for 10 to 15 minutes. And so, we can't.
I want to apologize to Paul Baker. I confused him with Paulo Costa. But I just wanted to correct myself there. But
all good, man. So at the end of the day, man, I want to thank everybody so much for watching live and being a part of the conversation. You're always a huge part of what makes this machine move. And of course, to my conversational partner in crime, Comic Boom, from joining us into from the snowy depths of Canada as of yesterday, I suppose, after your blizzard.
Huge blizzard here. Huge blizzard.
So, I can't thank him enough for being a part of the conversation and for spending 2 hours wasting away talking about things that don't exist. Boom, I know you've kind of been on a little bit of a hiatus and you've been super busy with work, but with your new tech setup, I can imagine that the folks at home have something to look forward to in the near future from you. What do you got cooking?
Well, actually, probably for still another week, I'm still getting my tech stuff in order. But honestly, I think I got a huge Wonder Woman rant coming up on Marika Tamaki. I'm having a lot of fun with it because there's so much there's so much comedy and nonsense in Wonder Woman, mostly just ridiculous. It's not even bad. It's just comical. That I'm looking forward to that Wonder Woman rant on Wonder Woman and Maxwell Lord, or it's Maxwell Lord's not really Maxwell Lord. If you thought Maxwell Lord was an A-list villain, congratulations, you're wrong. In any event, he used to be an A-lister, but boy, how the mighty have fallen. But in any event, I'll be ranting about Wonder Woman, and I have to take some comical pot shots against death metal. I've been so dismayed with death metal in terms of the direction it was going. One of the reasons I didn't comment on it before is that I was just miserable, and I didn't think I wanted to share my miserable self with people. I want to at least have fun with it, and I don't want to be insulting because I just want to have fun with it and maybe be a little comical as opposed to mean spirited.
Yeah, man. I mean, with the death metal thing, I hate to say I told you so, but
well, I'd rather, if I got to be an eternal optimist, so be it, man. It's better than the other way around.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, I think I tend to lean a little bit more on the critical side. That could be to my detriment. Who knows? I don't know. I'm not saying my way of thinking is always the best way of thinking, but
oh no, it's all good.
I definitely look forward to watching your Wonder Woman rant and your death metal rant because, well, I'm not reading either one of those things. So that's you are directly how I get my scoop on what's happening with Wonder Woman because I dropped it a while ago. So I definitely look forward to it. And if you guys haven't subscribed to him, definitely go check Boom out. Link in the description below. Of course, if you haven't already and you haven't liked this video, you might be dead to me. Who knows? I guess I'll never know if you like the video, but just know if you don't like this video, you're dead to me. Aside from that, I am hoping to eventually get out a full rounded analysis and critique of the Joker War, especially now that we're coming up on its conclusion. I guess it's technically or was it last week? Did Batman 101 come out last week, or is that coming out this week?
Or 101 came out this week. Batman 101.
Okay, so maybe I might include it because it's kind of, from what I understand, the fallout of Batman Joker War. So I would like to do a full in-depth thing on that. It's just going to take a long time to make because that's like 5 or 6 issues worth of stuff, and it already takes me forever to do 1 issue's worth of stuff. But I would eventually like to very much get to that. I would like to go back to somewhat regularly getting on Donny Cates' Thor, especially as it's building into this next arc, which looks absolutely sick. And just for future notice, you guys can pretty much expect us to now consistently be on Thursdays at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I think this is the first time that we've actually sort of agreed to having a time and a day during the week for people to look out for, but we're hoping to keep it. Obviously, there are going to be things that come up now and again, but it seems like this has been a pretty good time for both of us at this point in life. So you guys can look forward to that so that I don't have to sort of spam out things on social media to let people know when we're actually doing one of these things. So keep an eye out so that you guys can figure out what we're going to be talking about next week. And if you have any suggestions for sort of evergreen conversations that you think would be worth bringing up, feel free to get in touch with us via Twitter. You can find us via the handles there. They're also linked in the description below. So shoot us a tweet. Let us know what you want us to talk about, and maybe we'll figure something out if it seems like something that we could hold a long-ass conversation over. So with all of that out of the way, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you to my pal Comic Boom. You guys are the best, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Let's Talk Comics. You guys have a great night.